Okay, go ahead. No. Okay, so I started this, but we're right at the beginning, so I went back. We're going to be talking about encoding. If you are not here or haven't done it yet, there's a quiz on Canvas at the bottom of topic 6. It's due March 2nd. Okay. So encoding, we just went over this. We saw that this is the true Apple logo, which we might not have ever noticed. And the important thing here is if you do not put your attention on something, it will not be encoded. It will not be stored in long-term memory. So moving on. We talked about Ebbinghaus last Wednesday, and I've already talked about distributed practice when I talked about how better to study, right? So we actually know about the importance of distributed practice, that you learn better if you practice many times instead of once and across an extended period of time. We've known this for a long time now. We've known this Ebbinghaus and a lot of research since then. You would remember late 19th, early 20th century. A lot of research shows that it's better, but despite that, students all over the world continue to not have good study habits, right? However, it works better if you do distributed practice. So more techniques, mnemonic devices, procedures for associating new information with previously stored memory. So that's to increase the, give you a pathway to that new thing you want to learn. Imagery, creation of a mental picture of items you are studying. Now we're going to watch a video that's going to express this far better than I ever can, so I'm going to leave it here, but I am going to comment that what visualization does is it creates a dual system for encoding information. So instead of just language and words, of just looking at the words, you're creating visual, a picture, spatial information. And that gives you another path to get back to that specific memory, right? Method of loci, I've also mentioned before, that's just using familiar locations, cues to recall items. So you just pair items with different familiar cues, such as walking through your house. And this, oh, I forgot that this is, we're going to watch this video if we can get it out of here. Okay, you know about that this, for some reason, this computer doesn't want me to show it here. Hyperlink. So this is a really cool video. Oops. All right. Okay. So here we go. Now I want you guys to pay attention and do these. Do the instructions here. Follow what he says. Wait a minute. Not hearing this. Ready? Volume here is up. Volume here is up. I know you can't hear them.
They're competing in a naked bicycle race and they're headed straight to.
All right, there we go.
I'd like to invite you to close your eyes. Imagine yourself standing outside the front door of your home. I'd like you to notice
What did they do? Why is it so hot? I touched nothing. Huh. Wonder if I did that. Let me push that one up. I have no idea how to do this. Let's see if I turn this on and off. Sorry about this. Stop. I guess so. Come on, dude. All right, let's hope it stays there. Let's try this again. Ridiculous.
I'd like to invite you to close your eyes. Imagine yourself standing
Close your eyes, everybody.
outside the front door of your home. I'd like you to notice the color of the door, the material that it's made out of. Now, visualize a pack of overweight youths on bicycles. They're competing in a naked bicycle race and they're headed straight to your front door. I need you to actually see this. They are pedaling really hard, they're sweaty, they're bouncing around a lot, and they crash straight into the front door of your home. Bicycles fly everywhere, wheels roll past you, folks end up in awkward places. Step over the threshold of your door into your foyer, your hallway, whatever's on the other side, and appreciate the quality of the light. The light is shining down on Cookie Monster. Cookie Monster is waving at you from his perch on top of a tan horse. It's a talking horse. You can practically feel his blue fur tickling his nose. You can smell the oatmeal raisin cookie that's about to settle into his mouth. Walk past him. Walk past him into your living room. In your living room, in full imaginative broadband, picture Britney Spears. He is scantily clad, is dancing on your coffee table, and he's singing "Hit Me Baby One More Time." And then follow me into your kitchen. In your kitchen, the floor has been paved over with a yellow brick road, and out of your oven are coming towards you Dorothy, the Tin Man, Scarecrow and the Lion, and the Wizard of Oz, hand in hand, kissing gracefully. Okay. Open your eyes. I want to tell you about a very bizarre contest that is held every spring in New York City. It's called United States Memory.
So sorry.
I had gone to cover this contest a few years back as a science journalist, expecting, I guess, that this is going to be like the Super Bowl of the Savant. This was a bunch of guys, a few ladies, widely varying in both age and hygienic upkeep. They were memorizing hundreds of random numbers, looking at them just once. They were memorizing the names of dozens and dozens and dozens of strangers. They were memorizing entire poems in just a few minutes. They were competing to see who could memorize the order of a shuffled pack of playing cards fastest. I was like, this is unbelievable. These people must be freaks of nature. And I started talking to a few of the competitors. This is a guy called Ed Cook, who had come over from England, where he had one of the best memories. And I said to him, Ed, when did you realize that you were a savant? And Ed was like, I'm not a savant. In fact, I have just an average memory. Everybody who competes in this contest will tell you that they have just an average memory. We've all trained ourselves to perform these utterly miraculous feats of memory, using a set of ancient techniques invented 2,500 years ago in Greece, the same technique that Cicero had used to memorize his speeches, that medieval scholars had used to memorize entire books. Oh, how come I never heard of it before? We were standing outside the competition hall, and Ed, who is a wonderful, brilliant, but somewhat eccentric English guy, said to me, "Now, you're an American journalist. Do you know Britney Spears?" I'm like, "What? No, why?" Because I really want to teach Britney Spears how to memorize the order of a shuffled pack of playing cards on U.S. national television. It will prove to the world that anybody can do it. I said, well, I'm not Britney Spears, but maybe you can be safe. You got to start somewhere. And that was the beginning of a very strange turning point. I ended up spending the better part of the next year not only training my memory, but also investigating it, trying to understand how it works, why it sometimes doesn't work, and what its potential might be. And I met a host of really interesting people. This is a guy called E.T. He's an amnesia who had very possibly the worst memory in the world. His memory was so bad that he didn't even remember he had memory problems. He was this incredible tragic figure, but he was a window into the extent to which our memories make us who we are. The other end of the spectrum, I met this guy, this is Tim Keith. He was the basis for Dustin Hoffman's character in the movie Man. We spent an afternoon together in the Salt Lake City Public Library, memorizing some books, which was exciting. And I went back and I read a whole host of memory treatises written 2,000 plus years ago in Latin and antiquity, and then later in the Middle Ages. And I learned a whole lot of really interesting stuff. One of the really interesting things that I learned is that once upon a time, this idea of having a trained, disciplined, cultivated memory was not nearly so alien as it seems to us to be today. Once upon a time, people invested in their memories, in laboriously furnishing their minds. Over the last few millennia, we've invented a series of technologies, from the alphabet, world of codex, the printing press, photography, the computer, the smartphone, that have made it progressively easier and easier for us to externalize our memories, for us to essentially outsource this fundamental human capacity. These technologies have made our modern world possible, but they've also changed us. They changed us culturally, and I would argue that they changed us cognitively. Having little need to remember anymore, sometimes seems like we've forgotten how. One of the last places on earth where we still find people passionate about this idea of a trained, disciplined, cultivated memory is that it's totally singular memory context. It's actually not that singular, their context tells all over the world. I was fascinated. I wanted to know how to do better do it. A few years back, a group of researchers at University College London brought a bunch of memory champions into the lab. And they wanted to know, do these guys have brains that are somehow structurally, anatomically different from the rest of them? The answer was no. Are they smarter than the rest of us? They gave them a bunch of cognitive tests. The answer was not really. There was, however, one really interesting and compelling difference between the brain of the memory champions and the control subject. When they put these guys in an fMRI machine, scanned their brains while they were memorizing numbers and people's faces and pictures of snowflakes, they found that the memory champions were lighting up different parts of the brain than everyone else. Of note, they were using, or they seem to be using, a part of the brain that's involved with spatial memory and navigation. Why? And is there something that the rest of us want? The work of competitive memorizing is driven by a kind of arms race, where every year somebody comes up with a new way to remember more stuff more quickly, and then the rest of the field has to play catch up. This is my friend Ben Pridmore, 3-time world memory champion. On his desk in front of him are 36 shuffled packs of playing cards that he is about to try to memorize in 1 hour using a technique that he invented and he alone can master. He used a similar technique to memorize the precise order of 4,140 random binary digits in half an hour. Yeah. And while there are a whole host of ways of remembering stuff in these competitions, everything, all of the techniques that are being used ultimately come down to a concept that psychologists refer to as collaborative encoding. And it's well illustrated by Nancy Paradox, known as the Baker-Baker paradox. It's really like this. If I tell two people to remember the same word, if I say to you, remember that there's a guy named Baker, that's his name. And I say to you, remember that there's a guy who is a baker, okay? And I come back to you at some point later on, and I say, do you remember that word I told you a while back? Do you remember what it was? The person who is told his name is Baker is less likely to remember the same word than the person who is told his job is a baker. Same words, different than remembering. That's weird. What's going on here? Well, the name Baker doesn't actually mean anything to you. It is entirely untethered from all of the other memories floating around in your skull, but the common noun Baker, you know bakers. Bakers wear funny white hats. Bakers have flour on their hands. Bakers smell good when they come home from work. They don't even know baker. And when we first hear that word, we start putting these associational hooks into it that make it easier to pick it back out in some later date. The entire art of what is going on in these memory contexts, and the entire art of remembering stuff better in everyday life, is figuring out ways to transform capital B bakers into lowercase b bakers. To take information that is lacking in context, in significance, in meaning, and transform it in some way so that it becomes meaningful in the light of all of the other things that you have in your mind. One of the more elaborate techniques for doing this dates back 2,500 years to ancient Greece. Came to be known as the mathematics. Story behind its creation goes like this. There was a poet called Simonides who was attending a banquet. He was actually the hired entertainment, because back then, if you wanted to throw a really planned party, you didn't hire a DJ, you hired a poet. And he stands up, delivers his poem from memory, walks out the door, and at the moment he does, the banquet hall collapses. Kills everybody. Doesn't just kill everybody, it mangles the body beyond all recognition. Nobody can say who he died. Nobody can say where they were sitting. Bodies can't be properly buried. It's one tragedy. Simonides, standing outside, the sole survivor of the wreckage, close to die, and has this realization. This is that in my life, he can see what each of the guests of the banquet is. They take the relative by the hand and guide them to their loved ones and their wreckage. What Simonides figured out at that moment is something that I think we all kind of intuitively know, which is that as bad as we are at remembering names and phone numbers and word-for-word instructions from our colleagues, we have really exceptional visual and spatial memory. If I asked you to recount the first 10 words of the story that I just told you about Simonides, chances are you would have a tough time with it. But I would wager that if I asked you to recall who is sitting on top of a talking hand horse in your foyer right now, you'll be able to see that. The idea behind the memory palette is to create this imagined edifice in your mind's eye and populate it with images of the things that you want to remember. The crazier, weirder, more bizarre, funnier, raunchier, kinkier the image is, the more unforgettable it's likely to be. This is a bike that goes back 2,000 plus years to the earliest Latin American. How does this work? Let's say that you've been invited to TED Center stage to give a speech, and you want to do it consistent, and you want to do it the way that this girl would have done it if he had been invited to TEDx Rome 2,000 years ago. What you might do is picture yourself at the front door of your house, and you come up with some sort of an absolutely crazy, ridiculous, unforgettable image to remind you that the first thing you want to talk about is this totally bizarre content. And then you go inside your house and you see an image of Cookie Monster on top of Mr. Egg. And that would remind you that you want to then introduce your friend Egg Cook. And then you see an image of Pretty Deer, reminds you of the funny anecdote you want to tell. You go into your kitchen, and the fourth topic you were going to talk about was this strange journey that you went on for a year. You have some friends to help you remember that. This is how Roman orators memorize their speeches. Not word for word, which is just going to screw you up, but topic for topic. In fact, the phrase topic sentence, it comes from the Greek word topos, which means place. That's a vestige of when people used to think about oratory and rhetoric in these sorts of spatial terms. The phrase in the first place, that's like in the first place in your memory time. I thought this was just fascinating, and I got really into it. And I went to a few more of these memory contests, and I had this notion that I might write something longer about this subculture of competitive memory. So there was a problem. The problem was that a memory contest is a pathologically boring business. Truly, it is like a bunch of people sitting around taking the SAT. I mean, the most dramatic it gets is when somebody starts massaging their temple. I'm a journalist. I need something to write about. You know, I know that there's this incredible stuff happening in these people's minds, but I don't have access to it. And I realized if I was going to tell this story, I needed to walk in and see it. And so I started trying to spend 15 or 20 minutes every morning before I sat down to New York Times, just trying to remember something. Maybe it was a tone, maybe it was names from an old yearbook that I bought at a flea market. And I found that this was shockingly fun. Never would have expected that. It was fun because it's actually not about training memory. What you're doing is you're trying to get better and better and better at creating and weaving up these utterly ludicrous, raunchy, hilarious, and hopefully unforgettable images in your mind's eye. And I got pretty into it. This is me wearing my standard competitive memorizing training kit, a pair of earmuffs and a set of safety goggles that is masked over for two small pinholes, because distraction is the competitive memorizer's greatest enemy. I ended up coming back to that same contest I had covered a year earlier. I had this notion that I might enter it, sort of an experiment in participatory journalism. I thought maybe a nice epilogue to all my research. The problem was the experiment went haywire. I won the contest. It really wasn't supposed to happen. Now, it is nice to be able to memorize speeches and phone numbers and copy lists, but it's actually kind of a side point. These are just tricks. They are tricks that work because they are based on some pretty basic principles about how our brains work. And you don't have to be building memory palaces or memorizing tax playing cards to benefit from a little bit of insight about how your mind works. We always talk about people with great memories as though it were some sort of an innate gift, So that is not the case. Great memories are learned. At the most basic level, we remember when we pay attention. We remember when we are deeply engaged. We remember when we are able to take a piece of information and experience and figure out why it is meaningful to us, why it is significant, why it's colorful. When we're able to transform it in some way that makes sense in the light of all of the other things floating around our minds. We're able to transform bakers into bakers. The memory palace, these memory techniques, they're just shortcuts. In fact, they're not even really shortcuts. They work because they make you work. They force a kind of depth of processing, a kind of mindfulness that most of us don't normally walk around exercising. So there actually are no shortcuts. We can have stuff made memorable. And I think if there's one thing that I want to leave you with, it's what BP, the amnesia who couldn't even remember that he had a memory problem, left me with, which is the notion that our lives are the sum of our memories. How much are we willing to lose from our already short lives by losing ourselves in our BlackBerry or iPhone, by not paying attention to the human beings talking to us, by being so lazy that we're not willing to process people. I learned firsthand that there are incredible memory capacities latent in all of us. But if you want to live a memorable life, you have to be the kind of person who remembers to remember.
Okay, part of the reason I show that to you guys is because he mentions a lot of the stuff we talked about, the importance of depth of processing, a lot of the techniques. Also, you know, it's some good clues. If you guys want to become super memorizers, well, there you go. It's a cool story. So, you guys who are online said somebody else popped up. You need to put your cameras on. I'm going to take, I just closed. Let's just give credit for attendance here. Quickly. All right. I'll do this afterwards. Okay. Okay. So let's keep going. Sarai, you need to put your camera on. And Brooke and etc. Okay, so this is what we just watched. More mnemonic devices. And now we just saw an excellent video of someone who's an expert on learning things and memorizing things. Peg work technique, use of familiar words or names as cues to recall items associated with them. Okay, chunking, we talked about chunking last Wednesday. It is easier, we can expand our memory. We were talking about the digit span, if we chunk items rather than try to learn them individually. Coding, okay, this is just refers to adding meaning to information. So first, you know, by associating with a meaningful stimulus. So you have to make it personally meaningful by associating with something that is meaningful to you. Acronyms and acrostics, I already mentioned. Acronym is just a word forms the first letter of items to be remembered, and acrostic is a verse or saying. Every good boy does fine. Factors that influence learning and memory. Now, this is going to be review. I talked about this and when we talked about how to study better. And we just mentioned number of study sessions, the more the better. Distribution, we just talked about distributed practice and how spacing practice is more effective than mass practice. So better 10 than 5 times and better 10 times over 10 days than 10 times over 5 days. That makes sense? Meaningful, make things meaningful to you. Similarity, try to group items that are similar together. And the most important thing when you do this is the groups have to make sense to you and how you're trying to learn things, right? So the grouping will depend on exactly what you're trying to learn and remember. And finally, we talked about this already on Wednesday, past Wednesday, items at the beginning and the end of study sessions will be learned better. So the recency and the primacy effect, right? And so just switch things up a bit. Okay. Recognition, this slide actually should have been last week and I was in the wrong place. So we talked about recall, like an essay question where you have to remember things based on a very small cues. Recognition is the ability to match a piece of information or a stimulus to a stored image or fact. So a multiple choice test. And if retrieval fails, it's called false positive. You think you recognize something, but you don't really. Okay, so where is this important in real life? And I did mention that, well, eyewitness testimony. So what happens when memory goes wrong when you fail the exam with your multiple choice or your recall, your essay question? We talked about misinformation effect. That's the tendency of misleading information presented after an event to alter the memories of the event itself. Big problem for eyewitness testimony. The Elizabeth Loftus, and there's actually a TED talk by her that I believe I have a link on in a few slides here. It's also available on Canvas under topic 6 materials. It really provided evidence that this happens, that what we see here after the fact can change the memory. That affects the accuracy of memories, and that's very important in court, right? There have been a lot of studies, even for something meaningful like 9/11, people do not actually remember what they were doing in that moment. That changes as they recall. There's been longitudinal studies that show that what they recalled immediately after changed as time progressed. Maybe even especially for really impactful events, right? There's the emotional connection there. Okay, so we're going to move on to forgetting. Forgetting when memory goes wrong. Unless you want to forget, sometimes you want to forget, and it's possible to forget things on purpose. So we're going to take our discussion now. I want you guys, you guys can do 2 groups of 3 here, and then I'll put the people online in a breakout room. I want you guys to think of times when you realize either you have a false memory or forgotten something important. Any kind of memory mix-up, right? When forgetting or mixing up of events has happened. And I want you guys to speculate on why this might happen. Try to identify times when it's more likely for you to forget something, okay? For forgetting or just a false memory to happen. All right, you're gonna have 5 minutes. Go ahead, you guys in the room, stand up and make 2 groups of 3, and I'm gonna open a breakout room for online. So that's Juliana, Chelsea, and Jennifer and Sarai. What about you guys? What did you talk about, and what kind of moments when you think that memory might likely to not work properly?
I had said the example of losing my keys. Like I can't remember where I leave them at, and it usually happens whenever I come home and I set all my things down and I'm like rushing to do other things. I forget where I left my keys.
Okay, good. A good example when you are, keys. We've all forgotten, lost our keys, right? Lost our keys. When we're so busy and focused on getting home and getting stuff done or whatever, we just set them down and we don't pay attention when we set them down until we don't remember where they are. Does anybody lose their car in parking lots? We park and we don't pay attention to where we park, and then we can't find it easily when we go back. And if you have a silver car, it's the worst. There's so many of them, right? So how about you guys out here? About this first group, what did you guys talk about? Absolutely, another excellent example. We also forget to notice when we do a regular habitual action. So those are the times we have to go back and make sure we turn off the stove or close our front gate, right? We all suffer this. Again, we're not paying attention because it's such a habit, we do it on autopilot, right? We automatically do it. Again, that element is that paying attention to something, right? And how about you guys up there? Okay. That's a really interesting example. So when you're pressuring someone to answer you, and maybe they're a little bit anxious, and what they really need is time to step back and allow their own memory to work. But instead of that, if I'm saying it properly, with the pressure, they're just going to grab onto something and give an answer that seems plausible, right? And the worst thing about that is then their actual memory is being altered, right? Because now you're mixing up the power of suggestion. We talked about that last week, and we'll see it a bit here, I think. Right, that's another good example. Anybody else have an example? Yeah. Okay, another example, when you're getting a rush to get out the door, you use the vital part of driving away, which are your car keys. Okay, again, one of those things, if you're so focused on something else, you don't remember to do something you need to do. A good example. Anybody else, either you guys online, you guys in the room, anybody want to share another example? So it seems like that what we talked about here in this class, have been times when we're not paying attention on the thing we need to remember because we're distracted by other activities, right? Someone in my first class this morning brought something really fascinating that said that she doesn't have a lot of memories for the whole time she was growing up. And she thinks it's because she was always focusing on the next thing to do, always planning ahead and never stopping to focus on the moment. Again, if you don't pay attention on what you're doing, then you're not going to remember it the same. So this is a real example of how attention is important. And then Brianna brought up the fact that when you're really putting people under pressure and at the same time bombarding them with suggestions, you are, one, increasing their anxiety, which makes it harder for the brain to function, and two, suggesting false memory tasks, right? So great, you guys did a good job. Let's continue here. So again, encoding failures when you fail to notice. Anybody know what the correct penny is here? Any guesses? Anyone think it's A? Hands up and just raise your hand online too if you think it's A. B. C. Got one vote for C. B. E. Oh wait, we have a couple D's. Anybody E? E was a favorite last class. F. D. H. I. Got to vote for an I. J. K. L. Hey, you guys online haven't voted. You guys have an opinion. Well, anyway, let's move on. It's A. Okay, we've seen a lot of pennies, but how many people stop and take a good look at a penny and know which way Abraham Lincoln is facing, know which way what side the different things are on. So we have Liberty that's on the left side, it could be on the right, right? We don't notice this, right? So here's what we talked about the Loftus study. Here's actually a TED Talk with Elizabeth Loftus talking. And when I have an online course, if I have more time, I'd have you guys talk about the ethics of tampering with someone's memory. Anyone seen Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind? I think it is in there. That's crazy. Where he on purpose forgets. Yeah. So yeah, first he forgets him, and then you can go to this place and they can make you forget to get out of a relationship without paying, right? Anyway, it's a great movie, which really is kind of tampering with people's memory seriously, right? Okay, so memory illusions. We already talked about deja vu and jamais vu, I believe, but here's some more Krypton Nika. This is important if you ever write papers. Okay, this is when you forget the actual source of information and use the material as if it were our own. This is plagiarism. Plagiarism is stealing somebody's ideas. Okay? Generally, at your level, we talk about, most people just think, well, if you copy paste a whole bunch of words, but sometimes you don't remember that it wasn't your idea in the first place. The truth is in this world, in this life, almost nothing is new, right? It's hard to get something new. When I teach courses like research methods or where people have to write full papers, I always tell them, cite everything. If you tell me the sun's gonna come up tomorrow, find the citation, just in case you're doing some cryptoamnesia, right? Accidental plagiarism. It even applies to ourselves. I'm a researcher, I publish papers. If I copy my own words, it's still plagiarism and I could get censored by the academic community for doing that, even though it's my own ideas, right? Hard to remember what you've already said. I mean, I have trouble every single day in class remembering if I told you guys something or if I haven't yet. Deja vu, we talked about. That's when we feel like we've already seen something new. Jamais vu is the feeling that something that's familiar feels unfamiliar. And paramentia is when the proper meanings of words can't be remembered. And yeah, so a little bit of this happens all the time, especially if you read a lot and you see a word, you never bother to look it up, and so you kind of create your own definition. That's not the same thing. This is when you actually don't remember the proper meaning of pretty normal words. So why do we forget? I heard you guys talk a little bit about the circumstances when forgetting is more likely, but there's two main theories we're going to talk about now. One is memory trace theory, and the other is interference theory. So the idea behind memory trace theory is this. A memory trace is that physical change in the brain that occurs when learning happens in a memory course, right? So depending on what it is, it's going to have been consolidated with help of the hippocampus, and it'll be somewhere in your cortex generally, right? Memory trace theory holds that what happens if you display or disuse is that you don't remember because time passes without you having used or recalled that memory. In other words, if you don't take it out of long-term storage and put it into working memory and pay attention for it a while, it's going to disappear. Okay? So that's one idea. Now, this theory doesn't really hold up altogether because a lot of memories are still good and strong after years and years and years. And it's for everybody. You get old and you can suddenly recall something that happened in high school, right? And look at amnesia that's associated with Alzheimer's. So people with Alzheimer's, first, they lose the ability to form new memories, which is anterograde amnesia, right? And then they lose the memory, they have a little retrograde amnesia, which is loss of memory for things right before the event of the onset of Alzheimer's in this case. But they might be able to remember things from their childhood more clearly than ever. This suggests that those memory traces are fine. It's just even though they're not accessed, right? So other explanation is interference theory. There's two types of interference. So this is basic idea that other information is interfering with your ability to recall something properly. If it's proactive, that means older information. So older memories interfere with the retrieval of newer information. So for example, you learn, you're from the States, you learn to drive, and you go to England and you learn to drive on the wrong side of the street, because somebody is driving the left side, and you make mistakes, okay? Because you first learned in the US. Now, I was in New Zealand for a couple years ago, and they drive on the wrong side too. And I learned it was a little stressful and traumatic and caused a lot of, but I didn't run into anything, and I learned no crashes. So that was my new, even though I had proactive interference from my normal driving, I want to drive on the right. Then I came back to the States, and about a year later, I actually turned and started driving on the wrong side of the street in the States. And that was very interesting. I'm not quite sure why that happened. I had a little blip back to New Zealand. So that would be kind of like a retroactive interference. That's when newer information interferes with the retrieval of older information. Okay? So that was, I learned to drive on the wrong side of New Zealand, and for some strange reason, I pulled out of a parking lot and went the wrong way. Who knows why? Only happened once. So here's a nice example from your textbook. There's language. Say you study French and learn French as your second language first, right? And then you study Spanish, and you take a Spanish test, and French comes out on your Spanish test, okay? This is an example of proactive interference. If you learn French first, and then it interferes with your ability on the Spanish test. However, it could also be that if you learn French and then Spanish, and then you take a French test or go to France, that your Spanish now interferes with your ability to speak French. So that's retroactive interference, right? Well, I learned Spanish first, and then I studied French when I was already bilingual. I was already fluent in Spanish. When I speak Spanish or am around people who speak Spanish, I don't think in English. There's no translation. I just speak Spanish, right? When I learned French, I wouldn't revert to English, or I was always like substituting Spanish for French, which is interesting because that's like not my first language, and also Spanish or French are more similar, right? Okay, so I'm not going anywhere. Oh, okay. Reasons for forgetting. This is just a summary table of what we've already talked about. Encoding failure, the information is not attended to. So you don't pay attention, it is not actually encoded in long-term memory. A lot of our examples were from that. So you're not paying attention, so therefore you don't remember things. Happens all the time. You lose your keys, you lose your car, you forget whether you turned the stove off or lost your date, etc. Decay or disuse. Okay, that's the memory trace theory. Information that's not accessed disappears or fades away from your long-term storage. And we talked about proactive information interference and older information interferes with newer, and the opposite would be retroactive. So Alzheimer's disease is a really interesting example. I just mentioned that people have anterograde amnesia when they have Alzheimer's. The first signs of it is that they're not able to form new memories. So they forget where they left their keys. It becomes more frequent. It's normal for us all to forget where we left our keys. But as you develop Alzheimer's, that becomes more and more common. And I don't know, I'm certainly not a professional, but some of the tests for it is a really simple test of, learn to list the words. Well, that for someone with even the beginning of Alzheimer's can be very difficult, even learning a new, because they can't control that new information. That's the first thing that starts to fail. And then what happens is they start to have retrograde amnesia and forget things pretty close in time to when the onset of the disease started, even though they might remember things from their childhood. And also the last thing they lose is their childhood. So again, this is evidence that maybe that whole decay phase doesn't happen, right? And there are various drugs that can help to slow Alzheimer's, but we can't stop it. Interesting fact is people who are more educated and or more intelligent, they are just as subject to getting Alzheimer's as anybody else. Alzheimer's care about education and intelligence, but they can hide it longer. Okay, that's because they have access to more information in there, more paths to different memories, more paths. So the more you learn things and study things, the more paths you're going to have. And I don't know if that's actually the case, but I hypothesize. I think more. Well, this would just put off the actual discovery of the disease. So they're missing that opportunity to have drugs or drugs that can help slow it, right? Alzheimer's disease, this is an older slide. I haven't updated this recently, but there's a lot of people with it. It's the most common type of dementia in adults and elderly people, okay? There are some drugs to help it. Risk factors, high cholesterol, blood pressure, smoking, obesity, type 2, lack of exercise, these are risk factors for everything under this family. You know this. Even for COVID, right? And also lack of socialization, not getting a social life. So older people, they tend to get isolated, and that just exacerbates things like Alzheimer's disease because they're not having that social interaction, which is so important. Amnesia means memory loss. Now, we already talked about this, but this is, I don't know if we've actually had a slide. Anterograde we have, inability to form new long-term memories. Retrograde is loss of memories for events that occurred shortly before brain damage, the onset of the disease of Alzheimer's. And there are other diseases that aren't Alzheimer's that also involve memory loss. Infantile amnesia. This is normal. It's very hard for us to remember anything before you're 3. And does anybody remember have a clear memory from before they're 3 years old? 81. Sometimes people have, a few people do. So this is your autobiographical memory. We talked about episodic memory on last week, right, on Wednesday, first lecture. That's for any kind of narrative, but autobiographical is specifically your own life story stuff, right? Usually it begins after age 3, right? And depending on the events of your life, some people have better memories earlier, some people it really doesn't begin till 4 or 5, but it's around 3 when it happens. So this we've already seen with the study better things. Sleeping is really important for memory consolidation. Get good sleep what you're studying, guys. Sleep deprivation, because sleep deprivation messes with your hippocampus, right? Brief exercise is good for memory. If you did not heed the thing about continuous practice and study, and you end up studying or cramming before the exam, get up and move, even if it's once, don't spend more than an hour maximum sitting and studying. Even if all you do is get up and run around the block or run up and down the stairs and do some push-ups, that's gonna help you with memory consolidation. It's also gonna make you less likely to end up with PT or something if everything goes up to get and move all day. All right, move. Also, food, we have evidence that omega-3 fatty acids really good for memory. There are other ones. I don't believe all the hype. They'll tell you anything as a supplement to improve your memory. That's probably not true, but there's some evidence for other things. I can't remember, maybe magnesium. I don't remember, something like that. But eat healthily, exercise, sleep well. It's going to be good for your ability to learn and remember things. Oops. So we talked about how you can organize things and how to move things to make it easier to remember. So I'm going to read this. I want you, the first person to figure out what it's referring to. Don't shout it out. That happened this morning. Just raise your hand, okay? The procedure is actually quite simple. First, you arrange items in different groups. Of course, one pile may be sufficient depending on how much there is to do. If you have to go somewhere else due to lack of facilities, that is the next step. Otherwise, you are pretty well set. It is important not to overdo things. That is, it is better to do too few things at once than too many. In the short run, this may not seem important, but complications can easily arise. A mistake can be expensive as well. At first, the whole procedure will seem complicated. Soon, however, it will become just another facet of life. It is difficult to foresee any end to the necessity for this task in the immediate future, but then one can never tell. After the procedure is completed, one arranges the materials into different groups again. Then they can be put into their appropriate places. Eventually, they will be used once more and the whole cycle will then have to be repeated. However, this is part of life. Anybody know what this is? Yeah? Laundry, right? This is the instructions for doing laundry. Kind of vague ones. Okay, good. Okay. Any questions on memory? We managed it a little bit earlier today than before, so we have a little break. Last time we went a little over. Any questions? Try to remember things for this one. Okay, so next week we're going to actually, not next week, Wednesday we're going to start with chapter 8, which is 7, which is cognition. I have not yet put the PowerPoint PDF thing up. I forgot. I'm going to try to do that this evening. So you guys can print it out if you want to. Anyway, all right, if that's it, thank you. And don't forget to do the progress check extra credit quiz on Canvas by tomorrow, by the second, right? Okay, bye-bye.